Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Omar Sangarima. He is the Principal Cybersecurity Technical Program Manager over at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Welcome, Omar.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on your career thus far?
Sure. So, I got looked at funny when I said I'm turning 40 yesterday. I don't know if it was good shock or bad shock. So that 10 years in cyber already. This year will be 10. This year will also be 5 at the hospital at Sloan. Prior to that, I was at Venable, a law firm down in Baltimore, and then prior to that, HCI was a physical and cybersecurity firm. So yeah, in a blink of an eye, 10 years in cyber.
When you're having fun, huh?
Something like that, I'll say.
Yeah, and probably stress and a lot going on as well. Sure. I imagine throughout those roles that you've held, you've had some responsibilities around hiring.
Sure. So even from just starting out, it was odd. The first job I had, I signed on as it was a team of 5, brought us in. And then, even a few months after that, once we were expanding the team, and then I think cycling through a couple of backfills as well in the first 2-3 years, I was part of the panel. The 7 interview process wasn't a thing still back then as it is now. So we got it done in 1 or 2 panels. And even the second job I held was on the hiring panel to expand the team there. And then here as well, even starting out with a couple of other analysts, I'm blessed with a good director myself that always wanted it to be an inclusive process, right? Vibe checking folks. He realized that we're going to work with these people, so might as well, get some sort of reads up front. And then now as the TPM, hiring on other project managers, other program managers to support the team. Sure.
Very cool. Yeah, so there's a lot we could pick up on there here in a little bit. Especially, I'd be interested to hear how you're able to evaluate culture fit when that can be such an intangible thing. I think for a lot of companies looking to hire. But usually we kind of start the show with the talent gap itself, whether it's real. So would you say that the talent gap is a real thing? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
I wouldn't say the talent gap is real, right? There is a gap there. I think the talent's there. It's just merging the talent with the right opportunities, I think, is where we're falling down. Cyber as a field unto itself is maturing. We're still, I'm sure you're privy to those threads as well on LinkedIn or Reddit or anywhere else where, is cyber an entry-level job? Can it be? Should you do certs or school, or what do you do? Do you hire for fit, more for skill? And I think there's a ton of folks that want to get into it. I'm part of the group of people, less gatekeeping, more gatebusting. You can train up for skills. You want to get good fit. You want to get good people. You want to have folks that just like to solve problems. I just think that, when you run into awesome folks, like yourself, right? Not blowing smoke here, but who get it in terms of how to be great hiring managers or great recruiters, right? Or great talent sourcers for the types of roles in cyber. It's a beautiful thing. You can work together with anybody that you're hiring for. Hiring managers have partners and folks such as yourself. But that's the exception still, right? So I think that, having a cookie cutter set of things to hit for any type of role in cyber, I think is doing a disservice to filling that so-called talent gap.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everybody has their own strengths that they bring to the table, and sure. You can't. It's hard to define a role that is truly entry level for anybody.
Sure.
Some people may be a fit for that entry level role. Some people may not have the baseline level of knowledge or intelligence or whatever it may be. How do we, I guess, what does a true entry level role look like? It sounds like you believe such a thing can and should exist.
Sure.
But how do we nail that down to where any hiring managers out there listening, they understand that, hey, in my particular situation, I can justify hiring somebody at this junior level.
Sure.
What does that need to look like, do you think?
I think I think you started out hitting the nail on the head here, right? Like a great segue with having the concept of a junior position. There's a couple of spots I've been in where, that associate, that level one, right? That analyst one or that engineer one was already what would be considered maybe 2 to 3 years in, right? It was the presupposition of they had, some sysadmin experience, or they were part of the help desk. And not saying that those aren't great entries into cyber, but at that point, I would argue that you'd want to have, those positions make sense, right? If somebody's been on the customer service or the IT help desk for 2 to 3 years, there's that familiarity with tech. That's going to be your, 2 to 3 years of experience, I think, tech wise, right? If you have the concept of a junior position where it's somebody that's coming in, might be a career changer, might be fresh out of school, that it's not saying that those folks can't turn into amazing analysts, engineers, eventually architects, and what have you. I've seen it, right? I've seen it with my own eyes. We've hired folks internally here at the hospital where not a lot of tech background, certainly not a lot of cyber background, and they've just been absolute rock stars, right? It's just the concept of knowing you have the time to put in to develop that. And I think then with that situation, you have to go, I'll steal a phrase here. You have to go upstream a little bit, right? You have to shift left. If you have a talk with your senior leadership, if you're the hiring manager, and you go, listen, what are we really truly trying to get here? Is it that 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 year person? Awesome. Let's set the job spec and let's put the call out for those types of roles. Let's not try to be cute and say, yes, we want that 3-year person, say, I'll split the baby there, and then call it an entry-level position. Just because it happens to be the bottom tier of your stack of human resources, right, of people, that's not necessarily meaning that it's an entry-level role. And that's fine. It's just being honest upfront about that and not trying to say, have it tagged up front so that it comes up on great searches for entry level. And then you read in the spec and it says 2, 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5 years. That's a gap that we're causing for our own selves here. So I think it's having that chat with your own leadership, making sure that's conveyed to any HR partnership that you have maybe internally, or if you're sourcing outside and you're having somebody, be a third party partner that's doing the sourcing for you. Having that all on Front Street, I think, again, will cut down on a lot of the BS time for everyone involved, right? Just make a smoother process to onboard folks at whatever level you're truly looking to source them for.
For sure, yeah. And I think you hit on something pretty important there. I think there should be a distinction between junior level and true entry level.
Yeah.
Junior level being somebody that has some relevant professional experience.
Sure.
Entry level, like you said, somebody that's a career changer, maybe has experience from another field, but they're entry level in the field that, that they're being hired into. And
Sure.
there's not a lot of that distinction making happening, I don't think. Like you said, it's we'll slap an entry level title on it. And I think a lot of this too is just the technology that we use. I've heard that LinkedIn sometimes will scrape job postings from other job boards, and then it'll assign a certain experience level basically to that. And that's how a lot of times you'll see these job postings on LinkedIn that'll say entry level when they're not truly entry level. So there's some of that happening out there, but I think it's important for every organization, every hiring manager to really look at these things and make sure, do a little bit of quality control and make sure that this stuff isn't falling through the cracks. Because I think a lot of folks see this stuff and they're like, well, I don't know that I would want to go work for that company since they can't seem to get this very basic stuff right. But you kind of alluded to the fact that there are a lot of folks looking to break into the field right now. I think one thing a lot of hiring teams struggle with is, in theory, I would love to hire somebody junior or entry level. In practice, like you mentioned, we don't really have the man hours to train somebody up.
Sure.
In what particular set of circumstances can we justify, building this person or, hiring these people? And how can we do it more than one at a time, ideally, because there's 10,000 plus people looking right now.
So I think it's really having a hard look at what your own internal development pipelines look like. And it's one of those places, right? Being a governance guy, right, through and through. I started as a pen tester and then slipped, tripped, and fell into GRC, and I haven't been able to get out there. So here I am, right, 10 years in. That's one of those things that does pop up on a lot of frameworks that you see, right? There's little pieces, and having that not be lip service, right? You develop your people, you train your people, you keep your people current. I think doing that exercise and then making sure that there's enough of a tail on the left-hand side and going, listen, we're going to have a runway. We're going to have an on-ramp. It can be demanding. I'm not saying that it's not going to be running and gunning, rough and tumble to start out, especially if you're just making a career switch, right? I'm not saying that, hey, let's do moonbeams and rainbows and really hold everyone's hand. Not at all, right? There's no time, as you definitely said, and not everyone's perfect. There's going to be times when you go, oh man, I just wish they would just know this. They can't, right? If you're going to put the investment in, and you're gonna start a program or expand a program, make sure that you at least have, again, a leadership endorsed runway. This is what level 1 looks like. This is what maybe the precursors to level 1 look like if you're putting out a junior, or even beneath that a little bit, a true entry level, and then have that built out before you put the job spec out. I know that that's, again, like a chicken and egg scenario, and that takes time away from watching tickets. That takes time away from program management. That takes time away from red teaming and blue teaming and purple teaming, or sorting out your IAM posture. But it's still one of those platform building capabilities that is going to pay off dividends down the road, right? I think it's the mark of a real mature internal program when you take the time to set those development plans up for every job role that you have under the CISO, for example, or inside of the InfoSec office. I think having a plan prior, definitely before starting it up, I can say I've done both. And it's a lot easier when you have something that's endorsed by your leadership to use at least as a blueprint to start that out.
Yeah. So I think you could even start with a more senior team and start to develop a formal training and employee development program, get that in place. And then once you have that infrastructure in place, you can kind of, like you said, build a tail on it to where you utilize that same program, maybe a formal mentor-mentee program, something like that, where each employee does have somebody more senior that they can go to help them get to the next career level. But once you have that for the more senior folks, you can bring in some more junior folks, and they benefit from all of that same infrastructure that you built up. Or maybe you have some sort of formalized training program where you send people to stands courses or whatever. Yep. And then again, you can use that on the more junior folks. But yeah, I often hear the sentiment that it's really not my problem in this case. We have to hire somebody more senior. We have this specific lack of certain skills on our team. And what's come up in previous episodes is maybe part of the way to ameliorate that is to cross-train the people that do exist on your team so they can fill in some of those gaps and maybe have some redundancy as well. So if one person leaves, then you don't get 25 different sets of skills leaving along with them. But obviously then retention becomes an important part. So do you have any thoughts on retention, like some best practices there to keep people engaged and sticking around?
Absolutely. It's again, it has to go from the top down, right? It can't be an afterthought. You can't, talk the talk about we're a family and this is a mission and we have a good purpose, and then not have it be verified and, have bona fide efforts done by your leadership in order to have that retention. And I think one of the biggest ways, at least we've done it at the hospital, is we turn it around. We listen to the teams, right? We as leadership might have an idea of, when I was coming up, I wanted XYZ, or I feel as though this should be something that would retain, right? We're blessed I say that very truthfully with, working in an organization with such a mission, right? We're trying to solve cancer for life. If that doesn't get you out of bed in the morning, it's not the right place to work. But turning it back around on the teams and going, hey, is this the type of training that you want, right? Is this type, is there anybody that wants to maybe take a crack at, rotational leadership capabilities? Does anyone want to, for sure, never be a people manager and just wants to get really crazy skilled at being an individual contributor? Honoring both of those, turning it back around and asking the teams what they want, and then kind of, collating that and saying, okay, we had, 10 or 15 or 25 of the 50 folks mention some sort of this. Cool. We have that. If we have it and we just haven't socialized it well, there's been a couple times there, right? You can dig back into, partnering with your internal HR capabilities and going, let's do some team building. Oh, we have a budget for team building? Didn't know that. You do your due diligence that way. If that was one of the things that pops up, if it's more training related, then you start, dipping it, like you said, into your SANs, into your IONs, getting partnerships there. I do highly suggest doing it with the heft of your entire organization behind it, right? And what I mean by that is, you come in and say, hey, listen, we have an InfoSec office of X people. A lot of them are interested in Y type of training. What can you all do for me? Right? And a ton of training providers will want to hear that. And instead of going, ad hoc and saying, hey, listen, okay, we'll cover one SANS voucher, talk to SANS and see if you can do some bulk ordering. Right, if SANS is a thing, or IONS, same deal, or like sit within Osaka for whatever you want to do, TCM, tons of awesome places I think will listen. But the crux of it is asking your people what they want and what that would make them feel valued, right? And then what I say though that has to happen right behind it is you have to act on it, or you have to let them know why you can't. Say, hey, listen, you heard, we heard this, but we can't do this right now, but we're thinking about introducing it into next year's budget, or we're going to at least run it up the flagpole. You can't do the one half of saying, hey, let's take a poll for what they want and then let it die, right? Because then it's almost better that you didn't even ask at that point, right? Because if you ask and don't do anything about it, then it's like, wow, we told them and they really don't care. You can't, you're walking into a viper's nest there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as a recruiter, I talk to a lot of people that are looking to move on. And a lot of the time it's because, I was promised this thing by my employer, but I've asked about it and they're just, they're not delivering on it, or they keep moving the goalposts on me. That one's also very common. They'd hit one goal and then they'd just be given another goal to get what it is that they're looking for, whether it's, promotion or whatever. One thing I think in this economy, or whatever you want to call it, in this environment for a lot of employers out there, it seems like there's less headcount, there's less budget for a lot of teams, security teams out there. I think in a lot of cases, good hiring managers, they would love to be able to send their people to more training, or be able to give them raises or whatever it may be, but there's not always necessarily budget for something like that. And any thoughts on what they can do from a retention standpoint as hiring managers if they don't necessarily have the dollars to throw at the problem?
I think, again, you craft it alongside the people. So, if, again, the gold standard, of course, right, SANS, but we both know, one of those vouchers can buy you, Hyundai Sonata, right? Like, it's not, and I'm not saying it's not valuable, right? Either the Sonata, I'm a fan of the Hyundais, or the SANS voucher. They're both equally in their own lane amazing, but they're pricey, right? Even buying them on bulk, you're still looking at, tens to not hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're putting out there, even for smaller teams. So I think if you sit there and go, listen, and be transparent about it, right? There's been times when I've sat there and said, hey, listen, boss, I'm looking, what can we do for a promotion this year? I'd rather have a fast no and a why versus, like you said, a maybe. And then, I keep hitting numbers, or I keep thinking, I'm doing great. No negative feedback, or just small negative feedback to work on, and then I'm thinking I'm busting through targets, and then it gets you keep kicking the can down the road. So I think transparency, and then sitting there, and sometimes honestly, what you can do is for leadership development, for example, you can send them right, to get the EMBA. You can send them to, pricey leadership courses, or, hey, for the next month, you're running the stand-ups. For the next month, you're telling us, how to arrange our capacity for, if you're in an agile environment, for sprints, if you're in waterfall, how we're getting to these different stage gates. There's different ways to have them take on those responsibilities. And I think, even if it's not leadership, as you mentioned earlier, the cross training, that's an inexpensive way that helps everyone. The person in question gets access to new skills, and hopefully, right, from a mentor on the team, hopefully, that wants to do the training. And sometimes even I've seen, if it's outside of the team, we've had a couple of situations where some of our security engineers saying, "Hey, listen, I want to get a little bit more under my belt in terms of cloud networking." Sat with a couple directors on the cloud side of the house. They're awesome. They're great. We're blessed with some great people to work with. And, we've come up with some shadowing programs there that I feel, right, has kept folks, during those COVID years, during when, everybody was running flat or people were looking to cut, right? We're able to retain headcount, and then also retain headcount externally, right? So not even have to answer those creepy questions of who we have to cut, or as well as folks stayed with us, right? And that was a big commitment. So there's ways that you don't have to spend dollars if you at least identify truly what folks need. I mean, and I'm not saying this though, right? Sometimes it's going to be dollars at that point, right? It's a capitalist economy. Like, you have to, but then also being open and willing to endorse those moves as well, right? One of the things, my boss is amazing, and he goes, "Listen, I want you to grow and develop, even if it's not here." And I've seen him walk that talk, right? He'll sit there and give an amazing endorsement for folks, even if they're going to be moving, outside of our team or outside of MSK. That sort of integrity from leadership, I think, also goes a long way in terms of retention.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some folks might be afraid to give people their blessing like that, to move on and explore other opportunities elsewhere, because at the end of the day you're losing an amazing employee. But even if you look at it selfishly, I feel like you may lose that one person, but then you're also gaining loyalty of all the rest of the team that sees you vouching for and supporting that person that leaves. So yeah, and I think so much of the concerns around people leaving are rooted in sometimes bad experiences, or previously toxic employees, or something like that. And I think trust is very important. As a leader, it's important to be able to trust your team, and they have to be able to trust you. That if they give you honest feedback, that you're not going to hold that against them. But all of this sounds very good in theory, knowing when somebody really has a strong motivator for promotion or training or whatever. But we don't live in a perfect world. And I feel like there's a lot of cases where somebody will leave and the hiring manager had absolutely no idea. And it was a huge surprise. So any thoughts how we can improve sort of the trust and the bonds between the employees and the managers out there?
I'm a big fan in 360 feedback, right? It's implementing that. It's not easy. It's not, and it's sometimes you'll do some hiccups. But to your point, as long as there's the blanket, this is to get everyone better. This is not, to bring up old beefs or get somebody back for something that they did to you 2-3 years ago. As long as there's that as a foundation, I think 360 feedback has been so critical, because you're able to, sometimes even I'll take myself for example, as a new leader a few years ago, giving feedback was terrifying. I didn't, and what I didn't realize, I think it crystallized for me when my own director is like, "Listen, that's now a huge part of your job. You have a responsibility to give that feedback." Now, it's not saying that you're going to deliver it perfectly every time. It's not saying that it's going to go over as intended, right? Communication begins at the ear of the listener. So that's a tough one to suss out sometimes for everyone. But as long as everyone's above board and transparent, that, hey, anything that's said is to get you better, I think then there's potentially less mysteries down the road. And that could mean, it's not necessarily saying that, oh, that's going to lead to 100% retention. Some folks will hear some feedback, won't work on it, or they'll work on the wrong things, right? It just won't be effective. You go back and give them the feedback again. You go back and have 360 sessions there, and it just won't work out. I think having the confidence as an organization to say, we did what we could. We were upfront and transparent about what we needed from folks, and then vice versa. If it's just not a good fit after all, then it's not a good fit. And it's having the confidence as an organization to say, we can go out and, we know what we need to backfill. We know the type of individual that we're gonna try to bring onto the team, for that cultural fit, as you mentioned earlier, and then kind of going from there. But I think once we switch to the 360, even those new leaders like myself, the ICs that were the subject of the feedback were never lacking for things to work on. Right. So even if I needed to get my feet under me in terms of how to deliver good feedback, folks always knew, hey, this is little places where we could improve, 1% better every day, that whole thing. But yeah, that was, I think, a practical strategy that we applied at MSK.
It's great. Yeah. And you bring up a good point about how sometimes, obviously we don't live in a perfect world. You're not always going to retain people 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. And you need to be able to plan for the inevitable, essentially. There's always somebody paying more, for instance, if somebody's very money motivated. There's really no way around that. Sure. And I think sometimes when we see these job descriptions that have, 3-4 disparate skill sets that no one person has anywhere in the country, don't get me started on that tangent. But I think often that happens because they'll have 1, 2, or maybe even 3 people leave. And then all of a sudden they have to backfill. And so they just throw it all together, in a single role. Any idea how we can combat that issue where I guess companies aren't prepared for people leaving and then make a rash decision to just kind of combine it all into a single role?
Well, I'll come at it from like a different angle here. I see that too. And that's a tangent I'd love to go down with you. But the way, from like any mentorship that I give for folks that are trying to break in, my go-to line is, a lot of those job specs are wish lists. Even you'll have them in the situation where, you have a whole department leave, right? Or, whether it was chopped from the top down, or maybe there was a bad leader put in there and then it just had a mutiny, whatever the case could be. That's one aspect. You get that laundry list, as you said. But sometimes really it's a lack of finesse on the hiring manager's part, or a lack of partnership between the hiring manager and, the people officer there, right? In terms of crafting something that you really need. I think, it's something where you need to always be constantly taking a look internally at your own program. I can speak to this firsthand. There's things in our identity access management pool that we didn't even know we had, right? We just took another harder look at what IAM was doing for us, and we had a ton of awesome other skills there, right? And looking at that, then crafting, hey, this is a service that we offer to the organization, having that go well. Just knowing and rechecking, kind of taking a pulse check every 6 months, every year. Every quarter might be a little too often for something this large, but going back and going, listen, how have we grown? How have we evolved? Right. And then recursively putting that back into the development plans that I mentioned earlier. So then you're constantly either setting up situations where you're almost internally backfilling those skills as the more senior folks either leave or get pushed up to management roles, or maybe internally transfer. They get really keen on cloud, for example. That could happen, right, with that shadowing that I mentioned. But you're always constantly reevaluating the skills that you have at your disposal on a team, and then constantly developing those and kind of cross training that. I think that's how you kind of head off the panicked hiring mode that you described.
Yeah, for sure. It's very much about being proactive. And a concept that's come up in previous episodes is kind of the idea of like a skills inventory, where essentially for each individual on your team or each job role, these two things are going to be a little bit different because certain individuals will have skills that aren't necessarily core to the job role itself. So you may need to separate those, but just kind of understanding what skills you have in what place, really getting a lay of the land. And then from there, you can start to build in some redundancy where, okay, we have a single point of failure with this one individual with this one skill set, and we have 5 of those people that have these completely irreplaceable, non-redundant skill sets. So we need to build some redundancy in here, or we need to at least have a plan for always be monitoring the market to know how much this person is going to cost if we need to fill that role. But the closer I think you stay to your team, obviously, the more comfortable you're going to feel about the necessity to backfill any of these roles, because you're going to have a heads up if somebody's unhappy or there's rumblings on the team and that sort of thing. You'd mentioned before, though, sometimes you don't necessarily, somebody won't necessarily work out. How do you determine when you've done your due diligence in coaching or mentoring somebody and when it's time for them to move on versus when they just need a little bit more extra help?
So I think it's an art and a science, right? There's, HR has been very helpful in terms of plotting, and HR like as a capability, not just HR at MSK or it's just in general, plotting out, like, go through steps, right? Document what you do, go through steps. That's more from the protection and liability side of things, but I try to take it from really engage with what those steps mean, right? If you put somebody on an improvement plan, like, have it actually be an improvement plan, not something I did so that I can fire them later, right? Like that, I think putting that on its head a little bit, turning it on its ear a little bit is I think a good first step. And then I'm always going to defer to try to coach somebody up, right? A few times where it's been a situation where, we've had to part ways with folks. I've always said, hey, listen, if you give me 3 more months, right, like we could figure something out. Like, let me try this other tactic. That's, I think, a better tactic to take, but you also have to check that with seeing what effect it's having on the rest of the team. I think that's truly where, if I've ever come to grips with knowing, hey, it's time, that's been one of the key factors for me. If I'm devoting a lot of time to coaching somebody up, and I'm taking then time away from, the other folks that are putting in the work, doing great things, and, I'm barely able to give them a high five and say, good job, because I'm just devoting all this other extra time into coaching someone else up. That's usually an indicator where, at least now for me, I'll go to my leadership and say, listen, we've done this. We're trying that. I have this on tap for this individual, but I feel like I'm being spread too thin, and I'm not supporting the folks that are absolutely carrying water for the rest of the team here. What do you suggest I do? Right. And again, I'm blessed with the leadership where I'll get either some nuances, I'll get maybe, hey, here's a different tactic to take, or sometimes they'll go, hey, listen, looks like you've tried everything that can be. Let's start having a different set of conversations and starting that in place. And then being transparent with the person in question, right? This can't all happen in a vacuum, right? You can't just be in some back room smoking cigars and deciding people's fates. Like that stuff is old news, right? Like, or it should be. You're transparent. You let them know. You try to really inculcate the fact that you want to keep them and you want them to develop and grow, because you hired them for a reason, right? There was indicators, right? Or you brought them on the team for a reason. So you don't want to let that go. But you also have to be upfront and then seeing what sort of effect that has on the person. And if you get the right reaction and they're going, listen, you know what? Awesome. Thank you for the feedback. We're going to step it up. They've turned into rock stars. I've had that happen to me. I've had the opposite happen, though, unfortunately, where, how dare you? What's going on? And those situations we take as, we take retrospectives on it after it's all said and done. Was there anything we could have done better? Was there any earlier part of the process we could have been more transparent with, right? And that's turned us, I think, iteratively into just a better spot to work for, at least, the InfoSec here. So, that's usually kind of the holistic view I take.
Yeah, that's great. And you've kind of plotted out at what step in the process things can break down, always keeping on top of these things, what you're learning from each time this happens, or from the one time it's happened. And I found it interesting that when you're bringing this situation to a superior above you're basically giving them a couple of options. You're saying, here's one way we could go about it, and here's the data to support that decision, and here's the other way we could go about it, and here's the data to support that decision. It reminds me a lot of previous episodes where I've talked to CISOs about how they would approach the board. It's it's very data driven, and giving them multiple options. So it's not just I don't know what the terminology would be, but clamoring that you need to do a single thing and making an emotional appeal. It's more here's what we've done. You document everything. Here's the data. Let's do one of these two things, and give a limited set of choices that makes it easier to streamline, I think, that decision-making process. But it's great that you went through that you're cognizant that it is important to take it seriously and document everything and be very transparent with the person. That's one of my core values is transparency. So that's great to hear. So that kind of leads, I guess, into the culture fit conversation. Like when you initially hired the person that didn't work out, you probably thought, okay, yeah, this person seems like a good culture fit. I've noticed some of the downfalls in hiring for culture fit, because I think sometimes you can really smuggle in some biases there under the guise of hiring for culture fit. But how do you evaluate culture fit in somebody that you're hiring?
So, and we're very cognizant of that piece you mentioned. You don't want yes people. Right. And if you hire just directly for culture fit and have a very narrow view of what that means, you can look to your left and your right, and then it's 4 Omars on a team. I would hate that. Right. That one is enough, I think, as a lot of my team would say. Some of the 360 feedback I've received. So it's really, you want some core values for, I think, the InfoSec capability as a whole. And if they're curious learners and they're willing to investigate a problem, right? If they're, like a dog on a bone about just finding a solution for things, I think if that's a core tenet, and that's what we look for, right? If they have that sort of intellectual curiosity, and, being technologists, you're going to need that, because I can tell you for a fact, InfoSec looks a heck of a lot different than it did 10 years ago. I'm positive it's going to look super different in another 10 years. So, just being willing to have to get up there and learn all the time, right? It coincidentally enough, one of the things, oddly, right, like, is threading the needle on the right level of imposter syndrome. As weird as that sounds, right? If you have it and it drives you to continuously learn and improve, you're our type of people, right? Of course, you don't want it to the point where then it freezes you from action, or it eats away at your confidence, right? You want to, but that's one of the things we say, like, we can't really trust someone who doesn't have at least a shade of that, because then it's suddenly they're thinking, they have it all figured out, and tech is just not going to be too kind to someone like that. Where we've seen that initial, I think, read has gone astray is when, again, it's the right type of support, and bringing that person along might not have been where it needed to be, right? And then we've just been ruthless and relentless about improving that, making sure that we have the supporting substructures to bring anyone along wherever they are, right? Get a good read of where they are skills wise, and then give them a runway, which is why we're so particular about making sure that we have those retrospectives, and we make sure that those processes and programs are in place for development, because that's the one piece where culturally they seem like a fit, but then it just went sideways. That's really, I think, where it went it went a little awry.
Did I guess expectation setting play into that at all when you had somebody not work out on the team? Like maybe expectations could have been set better in the beginning to really define what that runway looks like?
I think so. And also, I believe, again, having the two-way conversation, right? What we've developed over the years I've been here, I think is much more of a collaborative discussion where development is a convo, right? It's not directives. It's, this is where you think you wanted to develop into 6 months ago. Have a check-in. Is this where you still want to go? Is there new things that excite you more? What's driving you? Where are your interests? Having those check-ins with each individual contributor, with each person on the team periodically, like you said, will keep you close to that team. And then you can kind of adjust where those development plans go. And if you have enough people in, erstwhile the same role that are saying, hey, listen, we want to kind of shift towards there, that could be a great marker for where that piece of the department needs to go. Right? There could be a set of skills. We had, a couple of folks early talk about AI, for example. Right. And it was like, wait a second. This is before, obviously, Copilot was everywhere, or ChatGPT was, and okay. No, that makes sense. Let's look at federated learning. Let's look at maybe, upskilling there. And it was driven by the folks, on the ground. I think making sure that discussion is a two-way conversation. And then again, checking back in. You can't just set and forget it. This is not a rotisserie chicken, right? Like you can't just say, listen, we'll talk in a year. Did you do good? Here's your raise. Take care, right? It has to be a constant collaboration. The performance review, like my boss always says, the performance review can't be a surprise, right? The expectations have to be there. And if you're not meeting them, one of the two parties is going to know and feel that, right? If that's not there, if that finger in the air isn't there, I think there's more endemic issues in the department.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can think of a situation I was in at one point in my career where I worked for a company and I thought I was killing it by all metrics. Right? I blew all my targets out of the water, and then I sat down with, the COO at the time and did a performance review, and he's like, "Well, here's where you're falling short," and that was a huge surprise to me because all the metrics that had been set out for me, I was blowing out of the water. And that kind of thing that can really upset the culture of the team and morale too. What do you do, I guess, when the team has had a hit to morale? Because I think often that'll happen, even if you do have a really cohesive team and you are all working towards a common goal, whether it's, raises weren't approved for this year, or we can't get that shiny new tool we all agreed would be a good, addition to the team. How do you keep everybody rowing in the same direction if there's been morale hit?
I think you can't first and foremost, you can't ignore it, right? You can't play, like a weird family atmosphere where no one's going to talk about what happened a month ago, or no one's going to talk about someone coming in with a face tattoo, right? Not saying it's a bad thing. Address it, right? If not, that's all we're going to be looking at Thanksgiving dinner. It's like, the cousin with the face tattoo. That's, hey, it can't be ignored. Honor it, right? If the morale hit is, to kind of keep it in line with this conversation, if the morale hit is somebody awesome left, right, to go be a CISO or something wild somewhere else, right? Acknowledge it, right? Have the mourning period. If the budget came back and that awesome tool that everyone was getting so jazzed to work on and already pre-training and getting ready and fitting it into the program, how this was going to just make everyone's lives better, that got axed, right, in favor of something that the rest of the organization sees as more of a priority, acknowledge it. Hey, that sucks. Hey, this is tough. But how are we going to work around it? What are maybe the primary things that we're going to get out of that tool? Is there any other way that we can kind of at least either A, do it without the tool, or B, keep a running tally metrics wise, a hard quantifiable tally of why we really need it. And maybe it's an easier sell next year. But I think, what the worst you can do is try to slip it under the rug, right? Be open, be transparent, give the reasoning why something happened, right? Give that side of the story from either leadership or management or the organization side, and then be receptive to hearing for a little while, hey, this sucks. I miss this person, or hey, this stinks. This would be so easier with this tool, right? Or hey, you know what? The raise ain't covering inflation, right? Be open and honest about that. You can't give them the corporate line, because that's how you're going to lose people.
I completely agree. It's interesting you use the phraseology, "this sucks," but I think there's a key in there, and it's that you have to acknowledge what happened, that it was a negative thing, but try and at least spin it to start looking towards the future and thinking about what the future could look like, and acknowledge the suckiness of the situation now, but instill some hope, in the next step or the next thing they could be working on, and help people realize that. And this kind of goes back to the idea of servant leadership. And so many of the amazing leaders I've worked with over the years have that style where they're in the boat rowing with their people. And so when something negative happens, they're along with those folks, and the folks believe them because they've been consistent that whole time, in being open to 360 feedback and stuff like that. So you can almost, I think it's a practice skill, but you can frame it in such a way, like, it's not always going to be all rainbows and unicorns, of course. Acknowledge the situation, but move on and move to the next problem to tackle, which goes back to your point from earlier. If you're hiring the right people that have that intellectual curiosity, they're always going to be looking for that next thing. You just got to find what the next thing is, and kind of point them in that direction. What's interesting, you mentioned earlier, kind of the imposter syndrome idea, and that it's good to maybe have some of that, and how that ties to confidence. One thing I've noticed, and this kind of goes back to the idea of hiring for communication skills or soft skills, and did a LinkedIn post on this recently. There's another guest that had kind of mentioned how when we say that we're hiring for soft skills as an industry, often that's code for just wanting to hire extroverts. And so the folks that, maybe are a little bit more reserved, or, maybe they're really, really good executors and individual contributors, but they're not so good at maybe advocating for themselves, or, being open and honest about feedback and stuff like that. Is there a place for those folks in most teams? Or I guess, what are your thoughts on the folks that maybe don't have the best communication skills, but that have good, strong, say, technical ability?
I think I saw something maybe within the past year where, hey, probably on Reddit, I spend too much time there, but having extroverts adopt the introverts is sometimes some of the best synergies I've ever seen. Right? There's folks on the more technical side of the teams I support. They're absolute assassins with what they do. But there's folks that have joined the team since we've gone fully remote that don't know who those original people are. They're quiet, right? If you hadn't gone on site like I did, I think I snuck on like a few months prior to then COVID saying sayonara, right? And we haven't, lucky enough, we haven't had the RTO call. And it struck me because those are folks that, you want on the walls watching things when you have threat actors, right? Checking windows and checking doorknobs, but they're not necessarily going to be the most outspoken people on a team or even on a call. So I think the extroverts, it's our responsibility. And I only say that with being like a fake extrovert. I didn't realize this until maybe a few years ago, where why was I always tired after parties, right? I didn't do much at it, but it's the social battery, right? I just realized, my wife helped me, I think, realize it's like, hey, you fake being an extrovert, but deep down, you're just like me. It's like, you're right. But I think it's our responsibility to go around the horn on a meeting, right? Or to check in, or maybe the person doesn't want to talk on a full call. You ping them on the side, right? It's up to us to value those contributions. And I think like the quick answer to your question is those folks are absolutely valuable on teams. There's times when I want a few folks on my team to go deep diving on metrics, right? And I'll tell folks, leave them alone, right? They'll come up for air and they'll come up with some gems, but you just got to leave them alone. And they have, right? And, it was the easiest Swami prediction I could make, right? I ended up looking great, but it was really all them. And just understanding that that's the way they want to work, right? But always check in, take the extra step and say, hey, listen, we're going in this direction. Are you cool with how we're doing things? We're maybe changing up how we're going to manage our projects. Does that make sense for you, right? Taking that extra step, or else you're going to lose them. And you could lose them. There could be two ways to lose those people, right? They could just up and leave and go find a spot that, honors their contributions a bit better. Or the worst thing I would say is they don't leave, but they just check out fully and really check out. Like an introvert might seem checked out, but they're fully engaged and they're being, like I said, the assassin in their capability for the team that you need them to be. But then there's folks that are introverts and then you lose them. And I think that's the biggest tragedy of all, because there's some tremendous folks. I'm thinking of specific people on my team right now that I go, if they were to leave, we'd be in trouble, right? Yes, we have redundant skills. Yes, we're cross-training, but they're just so good. They have the institutional knowledge. They've been in cyber for so long. Like, it would be a real loss. So, yeah, I think it's on us to engage.
Yeah, and I would imagine communication styles factor into that a lot.
Sure.
As well. Like, obviously I've known plenty of hardcore introverts in my day, and and I have some of these tendencies myself where I prefer to communicate via text methods, whether it's, text message or Slack or email versus, when somebody says, let's hop on a call, it's like, the worst words you could hear.
It's an insult. Like, why would you do this? Who does this anymore? Right? I feel it.
Yeah. So yeah. I think a lot of folks that are very type A, very extroverted, they don't necessarily realize what that type of interaction does to people that aren't wired that way. Mm-hmm. Just being cognizant of that. I think we could all do well to learn a little bit more about human nature and the different personality types and things like that out there.
Sure.
But we're coming up on time, Omar. So just one last question for you. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
I think formalizing those on-ramps, right? One of the things that I'm the proudest of this year, and I mean, I'm going to toot my team's horn. It's not me, it's my team here, really. We're doing a lot of amazing things. I'm so jazzed to be working where I'm working. I get to come to work at MSK every day. I say that and folks are like, wow, you're a herb. But it's how I feel about where I work. But probably one of the biggest things I am excited about, we're starting an apprenticeship program. We're going straight to high schools. We're saying, listen, you want to sign up with us for hopefully 2 to 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, if it works for both parties, come work at MSK. Right? We're walking the walk. We're going directly to the source, right? We're saying, hey, cool, if you want to get a degree, fine, right? Like we're going for skills and we're going for fit. What's better than setting up a situation where you're working with a high school sophomore at that point, and then they're getting that institutional knowledge and they're ready to go and hop on after 3 years, right? Those, I hope, if we play our cards right, are going to be some of the strongest candidates we ever take on. If we do our part correctly. So I think more programs that are geared that way, right? Instead of bemoaning the fact that, oh, there's a talent gap, or, oh, what do we do? Set up some places where you can bring people in and vet them. And then really commit to that. Have that be part of your program's development, right? Set metrics where you're going to say, we hit X amount of development points, or however you want to quantify it, right? Or, hey, we brought on 2 apprentices and we're working, it's working like gangbusters. I think having that be a formality versus throwing your hands up in the air and, yelling at the sky, right? Which helps nobody. I think really could be something that should be a shift. I hope this year and definitely into next year and the year after.
Yeah, and it seems like in order to commit to that, you have to go beyond saying it sounds good in theory. You have to be able to say it's going to be worth it in the end, and prove why. Build that business case. The beauty of these types of programs is once you have them set up, they'll bear fruit for years. It's just,
of course,
a question of, I think, more long-term focus versus a short-term focus. So that's a great place to end, Omar. If people want to keep up with the work that you do, reach out to you. What's the best way to do so?
Find me on LinkedIn, right? I hope we'll link it somewhere here. I'm on there entirely too much. So yeah, definitely, if you want, DM me. And then, anything you need, anything I can be a service for, just ping me there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.